Imagine giving your whole heart to someone, only to wonder if they ever loved you back. A billionaire torn by doubt stages a shocking test, pretending to be paralyzed, helpless, and broken. Would his glamorous fiancée stand by his side, or would her mask of love finally shatter? What no one expected was that the quiet maid, the one everyone overlooked, would reveal a love more powerful than riches, and a loyalty money could never buy. Anthony Miller stood in front of the vast marble bathroom mirror of his Manhattan penthouse, the kind of mirror so wide it reflected more than just a man. It reflected an empire. The towel still hung loose around his broad shoulders, steam curling around him from the shower he had just stepped out of. But he wasn't looking at the sharp lines of his jaw or the silver streaks threading through his dark hair. He wasn't seeing the billionaire everyone else saw. He wasn't seeing the owner of half a dozen companies hidden under shell corporations, the tycoon who could shift the market with a single decision. He was staring at himself like he was trying to decipher a code written in his own eyes. Doubt. Pure, gnawing doubt. 42 years old, worth billions. Anthony had everything the world told him should matter: private jets, vacation estates on both coasts, an art collection worth more than some small towns. But in that reflection, none of it meant anything. All he saw was the possibility that his life, his marriage, and his trust had all been a carefully staged illusion. It had started 2 weeks earlier. The memory still replayed in his head like a broken record. Lauren, his wife of 8 years, had been lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, ordering dinner from one of her usual trendy restaurants. She'd put the phone down without ending the call, the faint sound of the line still open, lingering in the air. Anthony had been in his study down the hall, but the sound carried. He hadn't meant to listen at first. But then he heard her voice, soft, sweet, a tone he hadn't heard directed at him in years. She was speaking to someone else. "Eric, my love," she whispered, her words dripping with a warmth Anthony had almost forgotten existed. "It won't be long now. We'll figure it out, and then you'll finally be able to leave that apartment for good." Anthony had frozen in place, heart pounding so loudly he thought it might give him away. His wife, the woman he had shared his life with, was planning a future with someone else. The kind of voice she used with this Eric was not the voice she used with him. With him, it had become routine, dismissive, distracted. But with Eric, there was devotion, longing. That night, Anthony didn't sleep, nor the next. He tried to confront her subtly, tried to draw her into conversations, tried to read her eyes the way he read financial charts. But she dodged every attempt with a smirk, a joke, or a sudden "I'm too busy," and every deflection cut deeper. By the third night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of their master suite, asking himself questions he had never thought he'd ask. What if she only married me for my money? What if all the laughter, all the affection was just performance? What if I've been nothing but a bank account to her? Anthony Miller was not a man who tolerated being played for a fool. His empire was built on being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He hadn't clawed his way from a middle-class kid in Chicago to one of the wealthiest men in America by trusting the wrong people. If Lauren thought she could deceive him, she was about to learn otherwise. In the garage below the penthouse, Gerald, his driver of 15 years, waited with the car engine running. Gerald wasn't just an employee. He was the one person Anthony trusted implicitly. A man of few words, but with loyalty forged through years of service. He had seen Lauren enter Anthony's life, had witnessed her rise into the role of wife and socialite, and more quietly, had observed the gradual shift in her behavior. Anthony had laid out the entire plan for him one night in that very garage, his voice steady, controlled. Only Gerald would know the truth. Not the board of directors, not Anthony's lawyers, not even his closest business allies. Only Gerald. The plan sounded simple. Anthony would fake a catastrophic car accident. He would return home in a wheelchair, claiming he had lost the use of his legs. And then he would watch how Lauren responded. Would she stay by his side with love and devotion? Or would she show her true colors when she thought he was no longer the powerful man he once was? Gerald had agreed without hesitation. He was old-fashioned, the kind of man whose word was stronger than most people's contracts. "If this is what you need, sir," he said, "I'll make it happen." So late one night, under the cloak of near-empty highways, Gerald drove Anthony to the outskirts of the city. The road curved sharply through dark stretches of trees. At the appointed moment, Gerald executed the plan flawlessly. Tires screeching, a controlled skid, a crash into an embankment that looked real but caused no lasting harm. Police arrived minutes later, their lights cutting through the darkness. The ambulance followed, and Anthony played his part, groaning, his voice weak. "I can't feel my legs." At the private hospital, everything had been arranged in advance. Doctors, paid handsomely under the table, ran their tests and delivered the verdict. Anthony Miller, billionaire, was now a paraplegic, wheelchair-bound, dependent, helpless. At least that was the story. Hours later, Lauren arrived at the hospital. Her expression was carefully composed, shocked but not devastated. She clutched his hand, whispered that everything would be fine, but her eyes flicked constantly to her phone. She excused herself often to take calls in the hallway. There were no tears, no desperate vows, no shattered expressions of a wife terrified of losing the man she loved. There was only a performance. Anthony, lying in that hospital bed, noted every detail, and each one cut him deeper than the last. 2 days later, he returned to his mansion. The sprawling estate he had designed down to the smallest detail, a monument to his success. But now it felt less like a home and more like a stage. Every hallway, every room, every silence would become part of the test. Gerald wheeled him through the front doors. Inside, Martha, the longtime housekeeper, rushed forward the moment she saw him. Her face crumpled, her eyes brimmed with tears, and she fell to her knees beside his wheelchair. "Mr. Miller," she sobbed, clutching his arm, her voice breaking with genuine grief. "Oh, thank God you're alive. We'll take care of you. I promise." Her tears weren't for show. They weren't rehearsed. They were the raw grief of someone who truly cared. Anthony's chest tightened painfully, though he hid it behind a composed face. He glanced behind him at Lauren, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression flat, her sigh audible as she pulled out her phone and walked inside without a word. The game had officially begun. The mansion was no longer just a home. It was a battlefield of silence, and in every quiet moment, every glance, Anthony would find the answers he sought. The black limousine crept slowly through the wrought-iron gates of the Miller estate, its headlights sweeping across the stone driveway before settling in front of the grand double doors. Inside the car, Anthony Miller sat stiffly in his wheelchair, hands folded across his lap, his gaze locked on the mansion that had once been his sanctuary. Now, under the weight of his own suspicions, it felt like a stranger's house. Gerald stepped out first, his gloved hands steady as always, and opened the rear door. The cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of the roses Martha tended in the front garden. Anthony allowed Gerald to roll him forward, each turn of the wheelchair's wheels echoing against the cold silence of the night. The house loomed over him, familiar yet foreign, and he wondered if its walls would hold the truth or betray him. The heavy doors opened, and Martha appeared almost instantly, her apron still tied, hair pulled back in its usual practical bun. The moment her eyes fell on Anthony, her body froze. A second later, she dropped the dish towel in her hand and ran toward him. She fell to her knees, grasped his arm with trembling fingers, and her tears came without restraint. "Mr. Miller," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "What happened to you?" Anthony felt a lump rise in his throat, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had to. This was all part of the plan. Yet Martha's reaction wasn't something he could have rehearsed. It was too raw, too human. Her tears were not of obligation. They were of love, of loyalty, of someone who saw him as more than wealth and power. Behind them, Lauren entered. She didn't run. She didn't even quicken her steps. Instead, she sauntered inside, her heels clicking against the marble, her phone already in her hand. She sighed loudly, brushed past Gerald and muttered, "This is insane. I still have calls to make." Without a word to her husband, she disappeared deeper into the house, leaving Anthony staring after her. His jaw tight, Martha stood, still wiping at her eyes, and said softly, "You don't worry, Mr. Miller. We'll take care of you here. You'll see." Gerald pushed Anthony into the vast living room, the soft wheels rolling over Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes. The chandeliers glittered above them, but the space felt colder than ever before. Anthony let his eyes wander, searching for any sign of warmth, but the silence was deafening. Over the next few hours, the mansion was transformed. Gerald and Martha, both sworn into his confidence without ever fully knowing it, began preparing the house for Anthony's new life. Ramps were quietly installed, doors were adjusted, furniture shifted. Martha worked with a determination that was almost maternal, ensuring Anthony would not struggle for anything. Every move of hers was thoughtful, placing a blanket on the arm of his chair without being asked, bringing a glass of water before his throat even felt dry, adjusting the cushions so he wouldn't grow sore from sitting too long. Lauren, meanwhile, appeared sporadically. She leaned into the room once or twice, tapped his forehead with a perfunctory kiss, and said words like, "You're strong, you'll get through this," before retreating upstairs. The glow of her phone illuminated her face more than Anthony's presence ever seemed to. She laughed at texts, whispered on calls, and shut doors between them with an ease that cut him deeper than any knife. That first night home was the longest of Anthony's life. He sat in the living room, television flickering soundlessly, his mind too loud to hear anything else. Martha passed by quietly, later returning with a blanket that she tucked around his legs. She didn't speak much, didn't intrude. Her actions spoke more than words ever could. Lauren, on the other hand, sent him a message from upstairs. "Are you asleep yet?" When he replied no, she answered, "Stay strong, love." And that was it. No footsteps rushing down the stairs. No presence at his side, just empty words carried by a screen. The contrast cut through Anthony like glass. Gerald began his second job that night. The loyal driver, more than just muscle behind the wheel, became Anthony's eyes and ears. Every evening, after Lauren left the house with some excuse about the salon or late meetings, Gerald would follow discreetly. He captured photos, screenshots, audio recordings, small threads of truth that slowly wove themselves into a tapestry of betrayal. By the second day, the mansion was humming with quiet changes. Contractors came to install polished handrails in the bathrooms, padded grips by the bed, and ramps at the front and back entrances. Lauren supervised half-heartedly, scrolling her phone as workers hammered. "Put it wherever's easiest," she said dismissively to one of them. "I don't really care. Just get it done." Anthony, seated in his wheelchair nearby, said nothing, but inside he burned. She didn't even pretend. To her, this wasn't about his comfort, it was about appearances, about checking off boxes so no one could accuse her of neglect. That evening, as twilight fell over the estate, Anthony sat on the veranda overlooking the sprawling gardens. He kept his face serene, but his ears were tuned to every sound. That's when he heard it, Lauren's voice drifting from inside the house, hushed but edged with impatience. "I can't keep this charade up much longer, Eric. I'm tired of pretending to care. Do you think I enjoy wiping his mouth and sitting around like a nurse? He's a dead weight. The sooner we're free of this, the better." Anthony's hands tightened against the armrests, his knuckles turning white. The words sliced into him. His suspicions were no longer just paranoia, they were truth. She didn't see him as a man, as a partner, as a husband. She saw him as an obstacle. Martha appeared minutes later carrying a tray of food. "Your favorite," she said softly, setting it before him. Her eyes looked tired, but her smile was genuine. She fussed over the silverware, making sure he could manage the fork easily. Anthony looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her kindness pressing against the sting of Lauren's cruelty. As he slowly lifted the fork, his hands feigning clumsiness for the sake of the act, Anthony realized something. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. This was about survival. His wife wasn't simply indifferent, she was plotting. And the only way he would get through this was if he played his role to perfection, down to the smallest gesture. When Martha asked quietly, "Do you need anything else?" he shook his head, forcing a faint smile. She retreated, leaving him to his silence, but silence was no longer an absence. It was a language, a battlefield. And in the quiet halls of that mansion, Anthony was beginning to hear every truth Lauren tried to hide. That night, as the fountain outside whispered into the darkness and the wheels of his chair creaked across polished floors, Anthony swore to himself he would not let her win. He would not be destroyed by the woman who wore his ring yet loved another. He would watch. He would wait, and when the time came, he would strike with truth sharp enough to cut her entire world apart. The next morning, sunlight crept slowly across the wide bay windows of the Miller estate, spilling golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. Anthony was already awake, sitting silently in his wheelchair near the edge of his bedroom balcony. He hadn't slept much. Sleep came in broken fragments now, each dream haunted by Lauren's voice, whispering to another man. The cool breeze tugged gently at the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of Martha's baking from the kitchen below. He listened carefully. Down the hall there was laughter, but not the kind that warmed the heart. It was Lauren's voice, light and flippant, as if she were speaking to a friend about a trivial inconvenience, rather than the life-changing accident her husband had supposedly suffered. Anthony gritted his teeth, forcing his hands to remain relaxed on the wheels of his chair. He couldn't give away that he was listening, couldn't reveal that every fiber of him was still strong, capable, and burning with anger. Moments later, Martha knocked softly at the door. She entered with a tray, coffee brewed exactly the way he liked it, scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. Her eyes scanned his face instantly, reading his exhaustion without needing to ask. "You didn't rest much, did you, Mr. Miller?" she said gently. Anthony gave her a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm getting used to everything." He gestured vaguely to the wheelchair, to the room that felt more like a cage each day. Martha's lips pressed into a line. She didn't question further, but her actions spoke louder. She set the tray down, adjusted the curtains to block the harsher rays of sunlight, and laid a folded napkin across his lap, with the kind of care no money could ever buy. Downstairs, Gerald's voice rumbled faintly as he spoke with contractors about another set of modifications to the mansion. Anthony had asked him to supervise everything, both to maintain the cover and to keep an eye on Lauren. True to form, Gerald reported back each evening with details that Anthony filed away like evidence in a trial. By mid-morning, Lauren finally appeared, gliding down the staircase in a silk robe that looked more suited to a photo shoot than to a day of caring for her husband. Her hair was immaculate, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman preparing for a gala, not a wife stepping into a role of caretaker. "Oh, Anthony," she cooed, her tone sugary but empty. She bent slightly, brushed his forehead with a quick kiss, and straightened before her perfume even lingered. "How are you feeling today?" Anthony let his voice waver, weaker than he felt inside. Trying to manage." Lauren smiled faintly, but her eyes darted back to her phone almost instantly. She typed quickly, her thumbs moving faster than her words. "That's good, love. Stay positive. I have a busy day at the salon, appointments stacked back to back, but I'll check in on you, okay?" He nodded slowly, feigning fatigue. She was gone a moment later, the click of her heels echoing through the marble foyer as she left the house. Anthony sat in silence, the house suddenly vast and empty around him. The only sounds were the soft swish of Martha's broom in the hallway and the distant murmur of Gerald's voice outside, speaking on the phone as discreetly as always. Anthony wheeled himself to the library, the one room that always brought him comfort. Shelves of leather-bound books stretched toward the high ceiling, their spines lined like soldiers waiting for command. Here he felt more himself, more in control, even in the act of pretending to be broken. Later that afternoon, Gerald entered quietly, his expression grim. He handed Anthony a folder. Inside were photographs. Lauren and Eric, together in a downtown restaurant, laughing, holding hands under the table, sharing a glass of wine. In another photo, they were outside a small apartment building, her head tilted toward him in an intimacy that left no room for denial. Anthony's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he held the photos. He forced himself to stay calm, to remember the plan. These weren't just proof of betrayal, they were steps in a larger strategy. Each picture, each audio file Gerald captured was another weapon to be used when the time was right. That evening, Martha entered the library with a plate of warm bread, fresh out of the oven. She placed it beside him and hesitated, studying his face. "You've been quiet today," she said softly. Anthony looked at her. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough. Her instincts told her when something was wrong. He couldn't confide in her, not yet, but he felt a strange comfort in her presence. "Some days," he murmured, "the silence says more than words." Martha tilted her head, her brow furrowing as though she understood more than he intended to share. She gave a small nod, whispered, "Then I'll make sure the silence is kind," and quietly left him alone. Night descended heavily over the estate. Lauren returned close to midnight, the sound of her car crunching over the gravel driveway, waking Anthony from his half-sleep. He listened as her laughter carried faintly through the hallways, followed by the sharp click of her heels. She didn't come to his room that night. Instead, she went straight upstairs, her voice hushed as she whispered on the phone behind closed doors. Anthony stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the chandelier stretching like dark fingers across the room. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The accident had given him clarity, the wheelchair had given him invisibility, and Lauren's indifference had given him the proof he needed. But there was still more to uncover. He didn't just want to catch her in betrayal. He needed to know the depth of it, the full extent of her schemes. And he knew, deep in his bones, that what he had seen so far was only the surface of something far darker. When Martha brought him a blanket at 2 a.m., whispering that the night was colder than usual, Anthony finally allowed himself to close his eyes, but not to rest. No, he was planning every detail, every move, and as he drifted into that restless half-sleep, one thought consumed him. Lauren wasn't just unfaithful, she was plotting something more. Something that could cost him everything. Tomorrow the test would deepen. Tomorrow, the mansion itself would become the stage for the greatest act of deception of his life. The morning after Lauren's late return carried with it a strange heaviness. Sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows of the mansion, but instead of warming the rooms, it seemed to highlight the cold emptiness within. Anthony Miller woke before dawn, as he often did now, wheeling himself quietly into the grand living room. He positioned himself by the tall glass doors that opened to the garden, the dew still glistening on the trimmed hedges outside. From that vantage point, he could watch the house breathe, could sense who truly belonged within its walls and who merely occupied them. Martha was the first to stir. She moved softly through the house, her slippers whispering against the marble floor as she carried a basket of laundry. Anthony watched her pause at the doorway, noticing him awake. "You didn't sleep again, Mr. Miller?" she asked gently, her voice carrying the concern of someone who had known him for years. He gave a faint smile. "Sleep feels like a luxury these days." Martha set the basket down, walked over and adjusted the blanket across his lap. Her eyes searched his face, as though she wished she could lift the weight off him, but knew she could not. "At least let me bring you some tea," she said, and without waiting for a response, disappeared toward the kitchen. When she returned minutes later with the steaming cup, Anthony's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp click of heels upstairs. Lauren's footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing with a rhythm that felt almost staged. She descended the grand staircase, dressed not in casual morning wear, but in a fitted dress and expensive heels. Her makeup was flawless even at this early hour, her perfume trailing like an announcement before her. "Morning, love," she said, voice honeyed but hollow. She leaned down, kissed Anthony's forehead lightly, and straightened before the warmth of her touch could register. "How are you feeling today?" Anthony gave a small, rehearsed shrug, his voice thin. "Managing." "Still weak?" She smiled faintly, but her eyes flicked immediately to her phone. She typed a quick message, her thumbs moving rapidly, and then tucked the device back into her purse. "Good, that's good. I'll be at the salon most of the day, but I'll check in." Before Anthony could respond, she was already walking toward the door, her heels striking the marble like drumbeats of indifference. She didn't ask if he needed anything, didn't look back, didn't pause. She left as though the man in the wheelchair were merely a piece of furniture she had brushed past. Anthony sat in silence, staring at the space she had vacated. The contrast between Martha's quiet, genuine care and Lauren's cold, practiced concern grew sharper every day. By late morning, Gerald appeared with his daily report. He entered the living room, carrying a folder tucked discreetly under his arm. "I followed her last night," he said in a low voice, handing Anthony the folder. Inside were more photographs, Lauren in a dimly lit bar, seated across from Eric. Her hand on his, her head tilted in laughter, their closeness undeniable. In another picture, they exited the bar together, disappearing into the night arm in arm. Anthony studied the photos with a calm expression, though inside his blood boiled. He traced the edge of one picture with his finger, his mind already spinning through the next steps. These weren't just pictures of betrayal. They were evidence, proof that would matter when the time came to strike. "Keep watching," Anthony said quietly. "Every move, every call, every meeting. I want to know everything." Gerald nodded. "Of course, sir." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "She's growing bolder. Doesn't seem afraid of being seen anymore." Anthony's jaw tightened. "That means she thinks she's already won. Let her believe that." The rest of the day unfolded with a strange quiet. Contractors arrived to install polished chrome handrails in the bathrooms and wider ramps at the entrances. Lauren had scheduled the appointments, claiming it was for Anthony's comfort, but her lack of involvement betrayed her. She scrolled on her phone as the workers hammered, barely glancing at their progress. "Just put it wherever's easiest," she told one of them when asked about placement. Anthony observed silently, his eyes narrowing. Every decision she made was mechanical, devoid of emotion. She wanted the appearance of a caring wife, but not the substance. That evening, as twilight stretched shadows across the estate, Anthony wheeled himself onto the veranda. The sky blushed with streaks of orange and purple, the fountain burbling softly in the garden. He sat motionless, listening. Inside, faint voices carried through the hall. Lauren's voice, sharp and impatient, cut through the quiet. I can't do this much longer, Eric. Playing nursemaid isn't my idea of a life. He's nothing now, a burden. I didn't sign up for this." Anthony's grip on the armrest tightened, the metal cold beneath his fingers. The words were confirmation of everything he had feared. His wife wasn't just indifferent, she was disgusted by him, saw him as dead weight. Martha appeared minutes later, carrying a tray with steaming soup and a warm roll of bread. "I thought you might not be hungry, but I brought it anyway," she said softly. She set the tray on the table beside him, adjusted the blanket over his legs, and gave him a tired but genuine smile. Anthony looked at her, the weight of her loyalty pressing against the sting of Lauren's cruelty. "Thank you, Martha," he said quietly. She nodded, lingering for a moment. "Do you need anything else? More tea, maybe?" He shook his head. "This is enough." As she walked away, Anthony stared out into the darkening garden, his mind churning. Lauren's betrayal was no longer suspicion. It was fact. But what he didn't yet know was how far it went, or what end she was truly working toward. That night, Anthony lay awake in his bed, the television murmuring quietly in the background. Around 2 a.m., the sound of a car engine drifted through the open window. He wheeled himself silently to the balcony and peered down. Lauren's car was pulling out of the driveway, her headlights slicing through the darkness. He pressed the intercom. "Gerald." A moment later, Gerald's steady voice replied, "Yes, sir. Follow her. Don't engage. Just tell me where she goes." "Understood." Hours later, Gerald returned with more evidence. Lauren hadn't been at the salon as she claimed. She had been in Eric's arms again, this time in a dimly lit motel on the far side of the city. Photographs, audio clips, timestamps, everything was laid before Anthony. Anthony stared at the evidence, his face unreadable. "She's not just cheating," he murmured, almost to himself. "She's planning something bigger." Martha, who had come to deliver tea, noticed the tension in his face, but said nothing. She only set the cup down gently and whispered, "It's a cold night. Don't stay up too long," before slipping quietly out of the room. Anthony watched her go, his heart heavy but resolute. The contrast between Martha's silent loyalty and Lauren's brazen betrayal had never been clearer. He returned his gaze to the evidence Gerald had provided. Each photograph, each recorded word, was a nail in the coffin of the woman who had vowed to love him. But he wouldn't act yet. Not until he knew the full extent of her betrayal. Not until he had everything. As the night dragged on, Anthony sat in silence, the weight of the mansion pressing down on him. He knew now that he wasn't just uncovering an affair, he was uncovering a plot. And when the truth was finally revealed, it wouldn't just be Lauren who fell, it would be everyone who thought they could strip Anthony Miller of his power. The days that followed blurred into a tense rhythm inside the Miller estate, each hour weighed down by suspicion and silence. The mansion itself seemed to change character, once vibrant with the constant flow of guests, laughter from Lauren's lavish dinner parties, and the hum of Anthony's business calls. It now felt like a stage play where every gesture, every word, every silence was under Anthony's watchful eye. He had become both actor and audience, playing the role of a broken man while secretly studying the shifting loyalties within his home. Mornings began with the soft sounds of Martha's care. The rattle of dishes, the faint clatter of pots, the aroma of fresh coffee. She treated Anthony with a reverence that was quiet but unshakable. If he struggled with the fork, she stepped forward without hesitation. If he looked cold, she draped a blanket before he even asked. Her devotion was practical, honest and unspoken. Lauren, by contrast, moved through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She emerged from her bedroom late, already dressed to impress, makeup flawless, hair perfect. Her phone was an extension of her hand, her laughter reserved for voices on the other end of the line. She dropped perfunctory kisses on Anthony's forehead, whispered empty encouragements, and then vanished into her world of salons, parties, and secret meetings. It was one of those mornings when Anthony, sitting quietly in the library, overheard something that confirmed his darkest suspicions. The library's heavy oak doors were cracked just enough for sound to drift in from the hall. Lauren's voice, hushed but sharp, cut through the silence. "I can't do this much longer, Eric. I'm tired of pretending. He's just sitting there like dead weight. This whole charade, it's exhausting. But soon, very soon, it'll all be ours." Anthony froze, his hands tightening around the wheels of his chair. His chest burned, not from shock, he had already suspected this, but from the cold confirmation. It wasn't just an affair. It was a plot, a plan. And he was the target. Later that day, Gerald returned from his discreet surveillance with more evidence. Photographs of Lauren and Eric in a downtown cafe, leaning in close, their smiles wide and intimate. Audio recordings of whispered conversations about papers, signatures, and being free. Anthony listened to the recordings in silence, each word slicing deeper than the last. "She's not just cheating," Gerald said gravely, placing the evidence on Anthony's desk. "She's scheming. They're planning to take everything." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Then we let them keep playing. The more rope they take, the easier it will be to watch them hang themselves." That evening, as the mansion settled into its heavy silence, Martha appeared with a tray of dinner. She set it down carefully, her eyes lingering on Anthony's face. "You've been quieter than usual," she said softly. Anthony forced a faint smile. "Some silences are louder than words." Martha tilted her head, as though she understood more than he let on. She adjusted the blanket across his lap and whispered, "Then I'll make sure the silence around you is kind." It was a small sentence, but to Anthony, It meant more than any of Lauren's hollow declarations of love. The following night, his suspicions reached a breaking point. Near 2 in the morning, Anthony stirred at the sound of an engine outside. He wheeled himself to the balcony and peered into the darkness. Lauren's car was pulling away, its taillights vanishing into the night. He pressed the intercom. "Gerald." "Yes, sir. Follow her. Don't let her see you. I want to know everything." Gerald didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he was gone, his own car gliding silently after hers. Hours later, he returned with photographs. Lauren and Eric entering a motel on the far edge of the city. Their arms locked, their laughter careless. Anthony studied the photographs under the soft light of his desk lamp. Each image was proof, not just of betrayal, but of contempt. She wasn't even hiding anymore. She thought he was too broken, too powerless to ever fight back. The next morning, Lauren breezed into the dining room, her heels sharp against the marble, her smile wide and false. "Good morning, love," she sang, pressing a kiss to his head. "How are you feeling?" Anthony's voice was weak by design.
"Still tired, still."
"Trying." "That's good," she replied quickly, already checking her phone. "Stay strong. I have meetings today, but I'll check in." And with that she vanished again, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and the emptiness of her words. Anthony sat in silence, staring at the untouched plate before him. He thought of the photographs, the recordings, the whispers in the hallway. Each piece of evidence was another weight pressing down on him, but also another weapon. He would not act yet. Timing was everything. Later that afternoon, Martha entered with a plate of warm bread and a soft look of concern. She studied him quietly, as if she sensed the storm inside him. "You look so far away," she said gently. Anthony's eyes softened. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Just watching. Just listening." Martha didn't press further. She only left the bread on the table, adjusted the blanket on his lap and whispered, "You don't have to carry everything alone. Mr. Miller." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. That night, Anthony wheeled himself to the veranda, the fountain whispering in the garden, the stars scattered across the sky. He closed his eyes, listening to the silence of the mansion, the silence that was no longer emptiness, but language. A battlefield where every glance, every word, every absence revealed truths Lauren thought she had buried. Anthony opened his eyes, his jaw set, his heart steady. He knew now that Lauren wasn't simply unfaithful. She was plotting something far darker, something that could strip him not just of his fortune, but of his very life. And if she thought he was broken, she was about to learn just how dangerous a man could be when he had nothing left to lose but the truth. The tension inside the Miller estate grew heavier with each passing day, as though the marble floors themselves absorbed the weight of secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Anthony Miller lived now in a theater of silence, watching and waiting. His mansion, once filled with music, laughter, and endless soirees hosted by Lauren, had transformed into something entirely different, a stage where masks were worn, lies were rehearsed, and every character revealed themselves through the smallest of gestures. Anthony spent his mornings by the wide glass windows of the library, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens. To an outsider, he appeared as a broken man, confined to his wheelchair, weakened by misfortune. But inside, his mind was sharper than ever. He was cataloguing, noting, measuring the absence of love in Lauren's eyes, the presence of quiet loyalty in Martha's every movement, and the deliberate care with which Gerald documented each betrayal. Lauren, for her part, had grown bolder. No longer did she make much effort to feign devotion. She left the house early, offering Anthony no more than a cursory kiss on the forehead and a hollow, "Stay strong, love." She returned late at night, sometimes in different clothes, sometimes smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't her own perfume. On more than one occasion, she slipped past Anthony's room entirely, heading upstairs without a glance, her whispered conversations on the phone echoing faintly down the hall. Anthony noticed everything. He remembered each word, each shift in tone, each time she called Eric "my love" when she thought no one could hear. But it wasn't just an affair anymore. Anthony began to sense something larger at play. Lauren's behavior was too strategic, her absence too carefully planned. She had begun to bring strangers into the mansion, contractors, advisors, even an attorney. They weren't introduced to Anthony. Instead, she spoke to them in clipped tones, pretending it was all part of the household's restructuring for his condition. But Anthony knew better. One afternoon, Anthony sat silently in the corner of the dining room as Lauren directed a group of workers installing new rails and ramps. She didn't even acknowledge him. When asked where to place a support handle in the master bathroom, she waved her manicured hand dismissively. Anywhere that's easiest for the workers. Doesn't matter where. He won't be using it much anyway. Anthony's chest tightened at the words. He said nothing, his expression calm, but inside the fire burned hotter. That evening Martha brought him dinner, chicken soup, warm bread, a small dish of fresh berries. She placed the tray carefully in front of him, her eyes flicking up to his. She didn't ask questions, but her gaze lingered longer than usual, as if she could sense the storm inside him. "I know you don't have much appetite these days," she whispered, "but I made this myself. It might help." Anthony gave her a small smile. "Your care is never wasted, Martha." She looked away, blinking quickly, then excused herself. Her footsteps faded down the hall, but Anthony could feel her presence still. Unlike Lauren, who had grown colder with each passing day, Martha's quiet warmth filled the silences that might otherwise have suffocated him. That night, the silence of the mansion was shattered by the sound of a car engine in the driveway. Anthony wheeled himself to the balcony and watched as Lauren's car pulled up just after midnight. She stepped out, her lipstick smudged, her hair slightly undone, her perfume mingled with the sharp scent of whiskey. She stumbled slightly on her heels before steadying herself and walking inside. Anthony returned to his bed, lying still, his face unreadable. Minutes later, he heard her voice upstairs, muffled through the walls. "Yes, Eric, I'm home. Don't worry. He doesn't suspect a thing. He's too broken, too tired. This will all be over soon." Anthony closed his eyes. Every word was another blade in his chest, but also another piece of evidence for the case he was building in silence. The following morning, Gerald entered the library with a grim expression. He placed a small recorder on the desk, pressing play. Lauren's voice filled the room, recorded from one of her late-night outings. "He's getting weaker every day. Once the papers are signed, it'll all be ours." "Just a little longer, Eric, just a little longer." Anthony listened without blinking. When the recording ended, he nodded once. "She thinks she's already won." Gerald leaned forward, his voice low. "Sir, this isn't just about money anymore. She's planning something bigger. I've heard whispers, talk of selling the mansion, liquidating assets, even interdicting you legally." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "Declaring me incompetent," Gerald nodded. "Yes, sir. That way she wouldn't even need your signature. She could take everything by law." For the first time in weeks, Anthony's mask nearly cracked. Rage flared in his chest, hot and suffocating. But he steadied himself, his grip tightening on the arms of his chair. "Then we let her keep digging her grave," he said coldly. "Every step she takes brings her closer to ruin." Later that day, Martha entered the study, carrying a stack of freshly pressed linens. She hesitated in the doorway, her eyes flicking nervously toward Anthony. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "I overheard something." Anthony looked up, his expression calm, inviting her to continue. "Last night," she whispered, "Mrs. Lauren was on the phone. She didn't know I was nearby. She said—" Martha swallowed hard, her hands trembling around the linens. She said she couldn't keep pretending to care. That soon you wouldn't even be around to stop her. That everything would belong to her and someone else. Anthony's face remained composed, but his heart clenched. He reached out, placing a hand gently on Martha's arm. "Thank you for telling me. Your honesty means more than you know." Her eyes glistened, but she nodded quickly and left the room, her footsteps hurried, as though she feared being caught sharing the truth. That night, Anthony sat alone in the library, the chandelier casting long shadows across the walls. He opened Gerald's folder again, studying the photographs of Lauren and Eric, her laughter, her touch, her betrayal. He replayed the recordings, each word another confirmation of the venom in her heart. And then he looked toward the darkened hallway where Martha's quiet footsteps had passed earlier. 2 women lived in his house, one who claimed to love him but plotted his downfall, and one who served him humbly, yet gave him loyalty without asking for anything in return. Anthony leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. He knew now what had to be done. Lauren's betrayal was no longer simply infidelity. It was conspiracy, theft, perhaps even something darker. But Anthony Miller was not a man to be broken. He would play the part of the crippled billionaire for as long as it took. He would let Lauren think she had won, and then, when the moment was right, he would tear the mask from her face and reveal her to the world. For now, though, he waited. He listened. He endured. Because the silence of the mansion was no longer just silence. It was the ticking of a clock counting down to Lauren's inevitable downfall. The mansion had begun to breathe differently. Each corridor, each polished marble step carried an echo of tension. Anthony Miller, who had once lived in those grand halls with the pride of a conqueror, now moved through them in his wheelchair like a shadow of his former self, but beneath the mask of weakness. His mind sharpened each day, his resolve hardening like steel. Lauren's patterns were becoming predictable. She rose late, often after the sun had already risen high above the estate. She appeared in expensive silk robes, hair and makeup flawless, as though she had prepared herself not for her husband, but for an audience somewhere else. Every morning she offered a kiss, light, quick, cold, then vanished into the day with her phone pressed to her ear. "Meeting," she called them. "Clients," she insisted. But Anthony knew where she went. Gerald followed. Gerald always followed. One grey morning, Gerald returned earlier than usual, his jaw tight, his hands clutching a small black folder. "Sir," he said quietly, shutting the library door behind him, "you need to see this." Anthony took the folder and opened it with calm fingers, though inside his chest thunder rolled. Photographs spilled out, Lauren and Eric at a bank downtown, walking together into a private office. Another showed them sitting with a lawyer, papers spread across the polished desk. Her pen in hand, Eric's smile broad. Gerald's voice was low, deliberate. "She's not just meeting him in secret anymore. They're moving money. Accounts in your name are being probed. Investments you never approved are being discussed." And the lawyer, he hesitated. "He specializes in guardianship and interdictions. She's preparing to have you declared legally incapable." For a long moment Anthony said nothing. His eyes scanned the photos one by one, his face a mask of control, but his knuckles whitened on the arms of his wheelchair. Inside, the rage burned hotter than it ever had before, declaring me incompetent, taking my fortune, my dignity, my name. He inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. "Let her try," he finally murmured. "Every attempt she makes is another noose tightening around her neck." That night, the silence of the house pressed even heavier than usual. The chandelier lights glowed softly in the great hall, but there was no warmth. Anthony sat alone, the television flickering meaningless images before him. Martha appeared quietly, carrying a steaming cup of chamomile tea. She set it gently on the small table beside his chair. "You should rest, Mr. Miller," she said softly, her voice kind yet cautious. "Now, these days seem harder on you." Anthony looked at her, his gaze steady. "The days are heavy," he admitted. "But not because of me." Martha's brow furrowed. She hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I overheard her again, Mrs. Lauren. She was in the kitchen late last night, speaking on the phone. She said she couldn't stand pretending to care for you any longer. That she was ready to disappear once the papers were done." Martha's eyes glistened. "I don't want to interfere, but I can't keep quiet anymore. She's planning something terrible, Mr. Miller." Anthony reached out, resting his hand gently over hers. His voice was calm, almost soothing, though his eyes burned with certainty. "You did the right thing, Martha. And soon the truth will be undeniable." That same night, long after Martha had gone to her small room at the back of the house, Anthony rolled himself to the study. The heavy oak shelves loomed around him, lined with books of history, law, and strategy, his lifelong companions. He placed Gerald's photographs on the desk, arranging them carefully, methodically. Evidence, proof, the puzzle pieces of Lauren's betrayal. From the hallway, faint laughter echoed, Lauren's voice light and false, as she spoke on the phone in her bedroom. "He's nothing now. Just a man in a chair. Do you really think he'll stop me? Once the documents are signed, it's ours, Eric, all of it." Anthony closed his eyes, forcing his breath slow and steady. "She thinks I'm broken. She thinks I'm blind. But I see her clearer than ever." The following day, Lauren brought an attorney into the mansion. Anthony recognized him instantly. Alan Carr, a man whose reputation for bending the law to serve wealthy clients was whispered in business circles. He entered with a polished smile, a dark grey suit, and a leather briefcase. "Mr. Miller," Alan Carr said smoothly, "I've heard about your unfortunate accident. I'm here to help make life easier for you." Anthony nodded politely, feigning weakness. "Easier? How?" Alan Carr laid papers on the desk, sliding them toward Anthony. "Just a standard power of attorney. It allows your wife to manage routine business affairs on your behalf. Nothing complicated. Just signatures, really. Formalities." Lauren smiled sweetly from across the room. "It's for your own good, love. You shouldn't stress about these things anymore." Anthony picked up the papers slowly, flipping through them with deliberate slowness. His eyes scanned the text, but his expression remained calm. Inside, however, fury boiled. The document granted Lauren full control, access to bank accounts, authority to sell properties, even the power to transfer assets. It wasn't protection. It was robbery, signed in ink. He set the papers down gently. "I'll need time to think." Lauren's smile faltered, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. Alan Carr can return tomorrow." That evening after they left, Anthony called Gerald into the study. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Take these papers to Almir. He's the only attorney I trust. I want every clause examined." By midnight the answer came. Gerald returned with Almir's verdict. "If you sign this, sir, you lose everything. Every cent, every property. She'll own you on paper." Anthony leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening into stone. "Then it's time to turn her game against her." The next morning, Lauren pretended sweetness again. She made breakfast for him, a rare gesture. Pancakes, fruit, orange juice freshly squeezed. She carried the tray into the bedroom with a smile that almost seemed genuine. "I thought I'd spoil you today," she said lightly. Anthony played his part perfectly. He smiled weakly, thanked her, pretended to be touched. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing his arm, whispering, "You can trust me, Anthony, always." But her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed not with love but with greed. Later, Martha came to clear the tray. She paused, studying Anthony closely. "She's pretending now, isn't she?" she whispered. Anthony met her gaze. For the first time, he allowed the mask to slip just slightly. His voice was low, steady. "Yes, but every performance has an ending." Martha's lips pressed together. She nodded, her loyalty silent but unshakable. That night, Anthony convened with Gerald in the library. The chandelier's glow cast deep shadows across the walls. On the table between them lay photographs, audio recordings, and Almir's detailed notes on the fraudulent documents. Anthony's voice was quiet, but resolute. "She thinks she's weaving a web, but what she doesn't realize is that she's already trapped in mine. And when the time comes, we'll tear away her mask, piece by piece, until there's nothing left for her to hide behind." The silence that followed was thick, charged, as though the very house itself held its breath. The game was no longer about suspicion. It was about survival. It was about justice. And in that moment, Anthony Miller knew. The woman he had once called his wife was no longer just betraying him. She was plotting to destroy him, and he would not allow it. Not now. Not ever.